258 out of 300. That's how much you needed to get in order to get an A star in 2025. So the conclusion writes itself, right? I mean, surely these exams are just getting harder year by year. But that's actually incorrect. And look, I know that chances are you're probably watching this because perhaps you, like many other people, found paper one absolutely brutal. And I'm not here to discount that, so don't get all mad at me. But what I am going to do is show you the data on A-level exams for Edexcel since this new structure started, and try to see what the implications of that could maybe be for your grade this year. Because as you'll see in the next few minutes, the whole A-levels getting harder narrative, again, discounting everything that's happened this year, which is obviously very recent, but just the general trend of A-levels, the idea that A-levels getting harder, that argument really loses its sting once you go through the data. The key thing to recognize here, and this is pretty obvious for a lot of people, but just in case you're not aware of this, your raw mark is actually not your final mark. Okay, your raw mark is like an input, and then it gets standardized according to what the experience was of other candidates on the paper. Okay, so the examiners run it through a standardization process where all the grades essentially are standardized according to the relative ease of the paper that year. So the important thing there is that this boundary is not set before the exam, it is set afterwards. So if the paper is super difficult, super hard, and everyone is bombing it, then chances are that grade boundary is going to be lowered, i.e. you need less raw marks to get an A or an A star. But if that paper is relatively easy, then you're going to need more raw marks to get an A or an A star. So you can actually see in the numbers. In 2019, the A star boundary was 217, and the year before that, in 2018, it was higher, so 229. So did the maths get easier between them? No. 2019 papers were judged more demanding, so the boundary dropped to catch it. So lower boundary, harder paper. Now there is a caveat here, and that is in 2020 and 2021. Why? Well, because there was a global pandemic. Now the big caveat is that 2020 and 2021 obviously had no normal summer exams, so grades were decided by teachers during the pandemic. And then 2022 was the first year of exams back. And because obviously that was a chaotic time, it was graded deliberately leniently. So the key word there is lenient. Okay, but what that means is that the grade boundaries were set low on purpose, not that students were suddenly scoring more than normal. It was designed to create a softer landing effectively. Okay, so 2022 isn't a year where you can really fairly compare it. But 2023 is where it resets. So grading that here goes back to the normal pre-COVID standard. Okay, and that grading leniency comes off. So under a fixed standard, right, the only way that bar climbs is if students are actually scoring more. Regardless of how you want to read that, it's definitely not a sign of the exam getting harder. I've actually been on the other side of this as well. When I was doing A-levels and I was in year 12, I was doing the Cambridge system. So it's a different board to Edexcel. But the marking system is extremely similar. Effectively, what happened was I was doing, I mentioned this in a previous video, I was doing these past papers, like days before the exam, I was doing terribly. And, when I did the actual paper, I thought I did terribly as well. And I ended up getting a B when I was expecting, a C or a D in that paper. And a big part of that is probably because, a bit of luck, yes, like the topics I studied for came up in the exam, but also because, that paper was genuinely hard. So, the boundaries likely got dropped there. Okay, now that was AS, so again, it's a bit different because it was a modular system, but the whole weighting system applied to it is very similar to Edexcel. So if it's not getting harder, at least theoretically, and according to what the examiners are trying to achieve from a standardization perspective, Why does it feel that it is getting harder? Now look, I obviously haven't seen the most recent paper, so I'm not sure how that relates to what I'm about to say, but what I can say is that a big part of the reason why questions do feel difficult, especially in the later stages of the paper, is because you got to remember a big part of what the spec is trying to achieve as a learning outcome are problem solving skills. So what does that mean? That means at least in the later part of the paper, sometimes in the earlier part as well, you start to get questions where it's a lot more ambiguous and topics are interwoven together. Okay, so it's no longer a case of just studying differentiation questions, okay, and then you're set up to answer any type of question around differentiation. Yes, that will help you, but that differentiation question could easily be linked with an integration question, okay? Or maybe there's a parametric link there as well. So the key thing to think about here is you need to have a radar in your head that based off the fact that examiners are likely to weave exam topics together in these big questions. Okay, so before just jumping into it, maybe try to take a bird's eye view and think, okay, how can I approach this? And this is backed by data as well. I'll put a link to that below. But maybe it comes down to how you're revising, right? So if you're doing past papers, chances are you're already accustomed to this way of question being asked. But what you need to have is just a radar in your head to say, okay, I know they're probably going to try weaving different topics. Is there another way that I can approach this that maybe isn't so obvious that would get me the final answer, right? So I think that's probably the most actionable step you can take to combat that. So that's where it lands according to how the grade boundaries work and what the data says about those boundaries over time. Now, whether or not this paper recently was actually fair or not, I can't comment. So that's a bit of an outlier for the purposes of this video. But what I can say is that if history is to be used as a guide, if this paper was really quite hard, what will most likely happen is that grade boundary will be dropped. Okay, so if everyone found it hard, they have to drop the boundaries according to what they've been doing, for the past 9 or 10 years. Now, obviously, paper 2 is coming up soon, so if you want to see what examiners are saying in regards to the common misconceptions and mistakes that have popped up every year running for paper 2, make sure to click the link below to get access to that video. I basically talk through exactly what the examiners have been saying about people slipping up in that particular paper, so make sure to check that out.